So this is another Bible study. We're looking at the book of James. We're going through it verse by verse, and today we're looking at James chapter 1, verses 26 and 27. Let's read these verses. Those who consider themselves religious and yet do not keep a tight rein on their tongues deceive themselves, and their religion is worthless. Religion that God our Father accepts as pure and faultless is this: to look after orphans and widows in their distress, and to keep oneself from being polluted by the word. Now, in verse 26 there, James talks about those who consider themselves religious. Certainly in our style of church, Dr. John, we often differentiate between religion and relationship. We don't like the word religion, and yet James uses it and later on, of course, defines it as he sees it for what it is. What's the original meaning of the idea of religion?
Right, yeah. I think James is contrasting true religion with ritualistic religion. Again, this would have appealed, the terminology, to his readership, because with being Jewish people, they were used to the rituals and ceremonies of the Jewish law. I looked it up anyway. The word for religious is threskos, and that just occurs once in the New Testament. And the Greek word for religion is threskia, and that's 3 occurrences, 2 in James and the other in Colossians 2:18, where it's translated worship. That's in the context of the erroneous worship of angels. So if this idea of worship, it comes across from the word. Looking at the definition, the dictionary gives a definition of religion as being the belief in and worship of a superhuman power or powers, especially a god or gods, appropriate beliefs and devout practices, obligations relating to supernatural persons and powers. I think this word has often come to be associated with the ritual, ceremony and liturgy. And I think, as we've said, the problem can be where people carry these rituals out almost without thinking and not having necessarily a relationship with God. So, and looking at the Bible scholar Vine's book, he's saying Threskia looks to particularly the ceremonial aspect. So I think the idea is that the people there, maybe it's their Jewish background and they're used to the particular ceremonies, there could be the temptation to think that, to go back almost to those ceremonies, to think, if I do this, this and this, and I perform those rituals, I'm going to be okay.
Right.
And I think what James is saying is they're deceiving themselves. If they think that what God's interested in is doing things in trying to gain favour with him. I'm not saying that the rituals in themselves, like the Old Testament, I'm not saying they're wrong in that sense, because they had a picture language. But to put your trust in just doing things without being aware of the God who made you, in a sense, they're deceiving themselves. And I think what James is saying there is, what God is saying is the religion he's interested in is the practical outworking of your faith. In other words, if people are in need, and it says getting examples there, orphans, widows, to meet the needs of those people, and also to not be polluted or tarnished by the world. And so I think the message there is the idea, and I think Jesus criticizes the Pharisees for the same thing. They go through all the ceremonies, all the rituals, to kind of look good, but they didn't care for the people. They didn't meet the real needs of the people, and of course they got tarnished by the world.
Now, what's also interesting, Dr. John, and I'd like you to comment on this as well, is the contradiction that James sees between the idea of religion and loose lips. So what is that about? Why does a loose tongue make religion worthless as far as James is concerned? What is that all about? Why does he make that connection? He says, if you consider yourself religious and yet you don't keep a tight rein on your tongue, you deceive yourself. So he's actually very specific there. His his example is that if you can't control your words, then your religion is worthless. What is the correlation there between our tongues and this ritualistic religion that you were just talking about?
I think basically when you speak, I mean, the power of life and death is in the tongue. It says in the Bible. What we say, the words can hurt, can cause immense damage. Jesus says, by your words you'll be justified, by your words you'll be condemned. So it's really what you say comes from the heart.
Yeah.
And I think why James is particularly homing in on this is that somebody can, on the face of it, they can look very respectable and go through all the ceremonies or go to church and appear to be Christian. But when they get out of church and back in with their families or with their friends or at work, then the words don't tally with what they're professing. And firstly, people pick up on that because they say, "Oh, you're a Christian and you're saying this type of thing." But also, the whole thing with the message of Christianity is showing the love of Jesus, having a relationship with him, being forgiven, and then doing his works. As Jesus said, the works I do, you'll do even greater ones. I mean, that is in itself is a mind-blowing statement. But that is true. It's from the words of Jesus. So the words, if you've got words that are hurting, that are pulling down, that are destroying, that is totally opposite to what God is wanting, in a sense of loving and building up and caring. So that's why he's so strict.
Yes, I think as well as that, there is a point here, which is that those of us who have truly received a new birth experience, our language changes. We no longer speak the language of unbelief, but we speak the language of faith. We no longer speak the language even of the world, but we speak the language of faith in Christ. So that is a challenge, and I'm guessing that that's a challenge that even fits into the contemporary context, 21st century, which is that actually, when James talks about practicalities and living a practical faith, he's not saying that words don't matter. Here he's clearly saying words do matter. So we shouldn't be we shouldn't be lulled into thinking that James doesn't think that our words matter in terms of his faith without works is dead. It's what you do that matters. Here he's saying actually what you say is an evidence of the work of God in your heart. And if you have all this ritualistic stuff going on, but there's not really a work of the Spirit in your heart, it will come out through your vocabulary, your language. And this for me is fascinating. Now, Jonah, I want to come to you and I want to ask you about this idea of deception again. This, James is obsessed with this. This is the 4th or 5th time that he's used the idea of deception. And he says it again. It's a favorite way of James, of expression of James. If you can't keep a tight rein on their tongue, they deceive themselves, and their religion is worthless. Again, I love the straightforward frankness of that as well. Why is deception an issue for James here? This is another means of deception. He says you can read in the previous verses, you can read the word and still be deceived. He says you can have a religious experience and still be deceived. Is effectively what he's saying here, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And you can see throughout even this first chapter of James that his heart is for these people. He calls them brothers and sisters again and again, and he wants these people to have a living faith and receive everything that God has for them. And so he's like, come on, don't let yourselves be led astray by having this false idea that I've actually given my life to Christ if I'm going on and speaking any old way. Actually, if my words are tearing other people down, if my words are, Paul was really big on this as well, said build people up, don't tear people down. He said, don't complain and you'll shine like stars in the sky, because it's so different to the language that the rest of the world speaks, right? But if our words don't show any difference, he says, you're kidding yourself. Like there's not been a change in you. Jesus said you are it's whitewashed tombs. If it's just practices on the outside, there's nothing going on the inside. Out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. That's right. So if you're not speaking different, your heart's not different.
This is such an important point. Your microphone's just dropped. And if it's going to happen to anybody, it'll happen to Jonah.
That's true.
But this idea of keeping a tight rein on their tongues there in verse 26, again, I'm just intrigued by this. You consider yourself religious, but you can't keep a tight rein on your tongue. Well, what is one of the fruit? What is one of the evidences of the Spirit of God in your life? It is self-control. He has actually in previous verses said we ought to be quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to anger, slow to speak. Again, James is emphasizing how important words are on this. Let's talk about self-control and words, particularly challenging in century 21 when you've got all the social medias, and it's easy just to say whatever you want, where you want, when you want, how you want, etc., etc., etc. Why is a tight rein on our tongue? Why is that important, so far as James is concerned?
Well, I feel like if you don't, for the fruits of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, and self-control, as you were saying, Pastor Roy. But if you don't show that with your words, in terms of, let's say you start you're talking badly about a person, you go talk behind someone's back about them and just talk negatively, and keep spreading negativity around you, then it's not really showing the characteristics of what the presence of the fruits of the spirits. And these are characteristics that God has encouraged us to try and show to the world and try to present to the world. And so it just contradicts each other. So I think it's really important that you use your words wisely, I guess, and really choose the sort of language that you speak to others with. You're positive around others, you're encouraging others, you're championing others. You're just really supporting others, and just, I guess, being a place of positivity and being positive. And
this is a challenge, because you're getting at the idea of gossip there, which can often be dismissed as tittle-tattle. And yet even the world says that loose lips sink ships. And yet so often we Christians, we make excuses for gossip. Well, I just had to talk to somebody about it, and you were there. And somebody says, well, I just happen to be really nosy, so give it to me, because then I can know what it's about. Actually, James is saying that words like that are a sign, and this is how brutal this is, are a sign that you're a fake. This is what James would say. James would say to you, gossip, you're a fake. Your religion's worthless. If your religion can't positively influence your conversation, you're fake. You are just a fake. There's nothing real about you. And this is not like a judgmental thing. This is a private accountability. It's between you and God. I think it's very, very powerful, isn't it? Don't you think, Ben?
Yeah, exactly. And I think I want to tie a couple of things together there, because there's a verse in the Bible that says, that's how they will know you, by your love. That's how they will know you're a follower of Jesus, by the way you love each other. And I think that's really significant, that people will look at what you do. People look at what you do and say, you're different because of the way that you love each other. And so I want to relate to what Dr. John said earlier about how, maybe on Sunday you might come and be all holy and righteous and good and all that, and then suddenly Monday you're totally different. Or maybe you might, you were talking about social media earlier, you might post on Sunday, look at church, it was brilliant, had an amazing time, and then suddenly your next post is some hate post, and people go, okay, so... And what you were talking about, it's like, maybe there's a bit of, this isn't real, is it? Like that post on Sunday, I'm not sure. And it reduces the validity of what you're saying, of what you do, the credibility. And people go, you might post every Sunday about church, but actually the way I see you live Monday through Friday, it just removes the validity and the credibility of that. And so I think it's really important that in those little moments where you think, what I say doesn't matter here, it does matter, because everything you do should build up towards Jesus and build up your credibility, I guess, in a sense.
I think it's so interesting that he correlates and he makes the connection between fake religion and loose tongues. It's just fascinating to me. And then brings in his well-worn concept of deception in there as well. I mean, James is absolutely not backing off here. He's totally going for it. However, then in verse 27, he then begins to define what he thinks genuine, real deal, quote, religion is. And you said, how many times is this word religion used in the New Testament? 3 times?
That's just 3 times, yeah.
And is there I'm going to get you to define what's the definition of religion again in the Greek language?
It's translated worship. Well,
Worship.
apart from James, it's only used in Colossians. Paul
Yes.
just uses it the once, and he's talking about people worshipping angels, which obviously is wrong. But it's that he uses that word of kind of religious, well, kind of almost some ritualistic worship.
So he's taking again a negative concept and turning it around, and he's saying actually is worship. Perhaps that could be a definition here.
Yes.
Worship
Yeah.
that God the Father accepts as pure and faultless is this.
Right. Yes.
This is real deal worship. That's religion.
Yeah.
And it's manifested by its fakeness, by the looseness of how we speak.
Yeah.
That's the overflow of the fakery, of the froth, if you like. Whereas he says here, actually, worship that God the Father accepts. And then I'd like you to sort of talk about that. This is a definition of genuine religion, genuine relationship, genuine worship, looking after the orphans and widows in their distress, and keeping oneself from being polluted by the world. That's 2 things as I see it, which is kind of socially active aspect, looking after orphans and widows, and then a holiness aspect, which is keeping oneself from being polluted by the world. Any comments on those?
Yes. I mean, the first one is kind of general, like I said, general care, those in need.
Compassion.
He gave 2 examples, but there's so many other needs.
Yeah.
And you look out in the world today, let's say the homeless, those without food banks. There's so many different needs that that we can meet. The other one, keep yourself from being polluted from the world. The Greek word there is epsilon. That can be translated unstained, morally pure, unspotted or uncontaminated. I like that's the amplified, uncontaminated. And that links in very much to what Paul wrote to the Romans, chapter 12, verse 2. And he said, do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you'll be able to test, and it's interesting, test and approve what God's will is good, pleasing and perfect will. But that links in, I think, the message of James links into what Paul was saying. The same type of thing. Focus on, God is good, his will is good, he's pleasing. I know you're going through difficult times, but his ultimate will for you is good, to bring good about in your development of your faith. But not, as Paul said, not to be conformed, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Again, James talks about focusing on God, focusing on true religion rather than false religion. And again, it's getting the mind, it's not switching off the mind, but it's actually using the mind to make a conscious decision to do the right thing. And again, because the wisdom brings in that you need the wisdom in order to do that. So it's all pointing toward this theme in James to put into practice.
Yes, right.
Put into practice.
It's practical outworking, isn't it?
That's
The
right.
worship that God accepts is you care for people and you stay uncontaminated from the culture of the world. Again, any comments on that? I'm thinking of verse 27 there at the end. Real deal, he says religion, we say worship, we might even say relationship. The outworking of a genuine relationship with God are these things. This is what happens. Any comments on those?
Yeah, I mean, looking at each of these, throughout the rest of James, he's fleshing out, those, the importance of taming the tongue, looking out for others and keeping ourselves holy. And I think it just points to how, actually when we're in a relationship that is meaningful, it changes us. One of the things that I'm really grateful for is that, I'm married to my wife Becca for a number of years now, and actually that relationship has changed me. I'm a different person because of it, but that's because that relationship is real and it's meaningful, and actually what matters to her matters to me. And so it is with our relationship, with God. If actually something that matters to God is my personal holiness, living, unpolluted by the world, I've got to take that seriously. It may not be what the world takes seriously these days. There might be a culture in the world of follow what makes you happy, and actually, looking inside to our deepest desires and going for those. And I suppose there's a bit of a challenge of God's word there in terms of actually God calls us to be holy, which means to, it's not a magic word. It just means to be set apart as people who follow God. So I'm going to be someone who follows God's word in my life.
And I think what makes this extra poignant for me is the context, which we've often discussed in these Bible studies, which is that this is all happening in the context of trials of many kinds.
True.
Which is what persecution, which is probably famine, which is the trial of heretical teaching, trying to get into the church to deceive God's people. Those themes have all come out, and that's just James chapter 1.
Yeah.
We haven't even got to chapter 2 yet. And so therefore this makes it extra poignant, because James is saying even in the midst of trials and testings and all of that, the real deal worship to God will still look after others. Hence his terminology of my dear brothers and sisters. And also you will still live a holy life. I mean, you would have thought that a bit of persecution would probably increase your prayer life anyway. Or or whatever. But James is saying, I'm going for real top-notch stuff. If we're going to do this, let's do it really well. So for me, that adds to the poignancy of what James is talking about here as well. Final question. This is just surmising. We talked in one session that this may well have been the first letter of the New Testament. What do you reckon? Do you reckon Paul read it?
Could be. I was thinking if it was the first, some scholars say it was written AD 35. That would, one of the emperors, I can't remember his name, was a real tyrant. He's described as a tyrant. And a bit later on there was Nero, but it would have put his writings right of real persecution of the church.
Because you can see influences from James on Paul, can't you?
Yes,
it's possible to see that. It's possible to make that link, isn't it? Paul might say it differently, but it's you can see. I mean, and Paul is probably a little more. If he deals with a subject, he will go into it in much more detail. Boom, boom. Whereas James is hitting on issues. It's like a pistol. Boom, 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 boom. Hitting issue after issue after issue. We've already covered so much, and that's just James chapter 1. So I think it is possible to see the influence of this on the writings of the Apostle
and
Paul.
even if you didn't read the writings, it's definitely possible that you would have been influenced by James himself, right? As well, I think one of the things in Galatians, I think it is that Paul says he went to see James, and James being one of the pillars of the church at the time, and so
I think that makes a lot of sense. I think, and if James is who we think he is, which is the brother of Jesus, that would have added extra, because no doubt Paul, being the inquiring man that he was, would have wanted to go and say, listen, you were the brother of Jesus. Tell me stories. A bit like what's going to happen when we go to heaven. Come on, James, give me the information. Anyway, that's James chapter 1, verses 26 and 27. It's brilliant. Thank you for sharing.